One of the most important things about Bojack Horseman is its realistic and visceral depiction of mental health, and here's how it succeeded in this area. Perhaps the most realistic aspect of this portrayal is how it shows that recovery isn't a constantly linear process of improvement. You're never done taking care of your mental health, just like your physical health. You need to exercise, eat right to keep healthy all the time. And it's the same for your emotional state. It sounds daunting, but really it's just a part of living and taking care of yourself. You do it one day at a time. It's why many therapists focus on teaching you techniques to mitigate your depression or anxiety when it reaches a fever pitch. Nothing will cure you, even if you begin taking prescribed medication. It's about adapting and learning how to healthily cope with your illness. Life is unpredictable, including your journey with recovery. You're never going to be able to control everything. You can only control yourself, and these techniques that we're taught can help you do so. And medication can help as well. On more than one occasion, the seasons of Bojack Horseman ends with Bojack in a more positive place, seemingly realizing what he needs to be happy and fulfilled, when that is never really a thing. It's a finale of a season, a happy moment. But as Bojack says,
you can't have happy endings in sitcoms, not really, because if everyone's happy, the show would be over. And above all else, the show has to keep going. There's always more show. And you can call horsing around dumb or bad or unrealistic, but there's nothing more realistic than that.
There is no finale that is going to bring you to a plateau where your life is perfect for the rest of time. Yes, there are uplifting times, but acting like that is the end-all be-all is what causes an inevitable slide back down, because you are going to have to keep living. There is no happy ending. After season 2, he resolves to put in the effort to better himself after receiving the advice from the baboon runner about committing to it every day, and that being the hard part. But season 3 doesn't really show that much effort on that behalf. He still drinks heavily, he's still rather abrasive. We can see that he tries harder with Todd, but there's not much in the way of effort on his part to show the people around him that he cares, especially after how far he sunk in season 2. And then later in season 3, he eventually pushes every single positive influence away in his life, except for Mr. Peanut Butter, because it's not really possible to push that guy away. He fires Princess Carolyn even after her plea for help. He's overtly cruel to Diane to differentiate himself from her and avoid his issues further. He sleeps with Emily for no reason. It's really a dark time for him after one of the most positive moments in the show as a whole. It goes to great lengths to show that wanting to change isn't really enough. You have to take action. You have to admit to yourself exactly the mistakes that you have made and the consequences that have resulted from them. Instead, Bojack sinks deeper and deeper into his addictions, his alcoholism, his need for attention through the Oscar campaign, excessive sex regardless of the consequences like with Emily. It's very much one of his worst seasons and has some of the largest implications on his relationships throughout the course of the show. It's honestly heartbreaking in the season 3 premiere to watch Bojack turn his back on everything he promised he'd do at the end of season 2 and then sink further into this vapid Hollywood culture, Hollywood, which would only fuel these addictions further. But perhaps the biggest and most obvious example of this is the transition from season 4 of this show to season 5. But it also happens to be one of my favorite severe tone changes of all time. In What Time Is It Right Now, the finale leaves Bojack in an extremely positive place.
Bojack, look, I never needed you to be a dad. I'm going to be fine. I told you from the beginning I have 8 dads.
Yeah. Good.
But I've never had a brother.
Although his time with Hollyhock was tainted, he was able to eventually provide his mother a gesture of kindness, even after she destroyed the one relationship that mattered to him, and then apologize and secure a relationship with someone who could be a genuinely positive influence on his life. It's also one of the first times Bojack extends kindness without expecting things in return, showing actual signs of change, both with Princess Carolyn's request for him to join Filbert and for delivering Henrietta's phone number to Hollyhock. It's 2 gestures of true generosity that shows a side of Bojack we haven't ever seen before. Over the course of season 4, we see Bojack really change in character. Not completely, of course, because he slides back down, but he does learn gradually how to open up to Hollyhock and let her past those thick walls he puts up around himself to protect his heart. Although, again, not completely. He still can't say he loves her at the end of season 4, but he has come a long way from the person that we left at the end of season 3, because like I said before, that was a disaster. My favorite moment during this development is when Hollyhock comforts him after he truly realizes how far his mother's dementia has progressed.
She's never gonna know just how much I hate her.
I'm sure she knew, Bojack.
Yeah, but I really wanted to say it to her face.
Well, hey, she's here now, right? And she has good days and bad days. Maybe eventually she'll recognize you. And then you can totally rip into her.
You really think so?
Mm-hmm.
Not the comforting you'd expect, but still. And he almost puts his hand on her shoulder. He naturally wants to open himself up to love, but is so afraid of getting hurt that he catches himself and forces his emotions back down. And this might come out of left field, but I also think that this stems from toxic masculinity that we see in his father. Not allowing yourself to feel things that would make you womanly or weak. Although Bojack hates his mother and father, there are some definite lessons instilled into him from his childhood, especially when you have a father who goes on long, misogynistic rants without any ability to interrupt or get away from the conversation.
Pearls are for ladies.
Like, I would have had to jump out of the car. Honestly, though, if he was going on that rant, I would have strongly considered it. And we can see this development from season 4 shown in his behavior in season 5, where he truly does want to change, at least for the first part, and make some efforts to limit his bad habits. But he won't admit the core issues, even when those habits begin to slide back. In the premiere, we see he drinks a set amount from a vodka bottle each day, and while yes, it is nice to see him limit himself and exhibit some self-control, the fact that he waits until midnight and then immediately downs it isn't great either. He's not addressing the root of the problem, his believing that he needs this to cope at all, and that him requiring it to go through his day is in itself a problem. Dr. Champ later voices the same train of thought as he regresses back into old habits as well, saying that never drinking again is ridiculous when you can just use in moderation while he's incredibly drunk. He is disproving his own point here. He's not admitting that he struggles too heavily with using in moderation to be able to safely drink casually, and that is part of admitting that you actually have that problem. And we can see that, of course, this method doesn't work for Bojack, as when Hollyhock reappears in his house later that season, she finds that he has one bottle for every day of the week.
Oh, that's just my new system I'm trying. I'm down to 1 bottle a day.
That is not only a far cry from where he started, but he also states that he is down to 1 bottle a week when we know he has been increasing in quantity. It shows that he is still lying to everyone around him, and probably even to himself. You can't cast away a problem simply by limiting yourself. You need to admit that there is a problem in the first place. And I appreciate this show for depicting positive change in the season before and showing some progress, but still not going all the way and showing the problems with this type of method.
I'm working out a system so I only drink a little each day. This is my cheat day.
And while yes, he is admitting that he drinks too much with these techniques, he's not admitting to himself that he has a dependence on alcohol that will eventually grow out of control if he feeds it even a little bit, which we see happens in this season. It's the same with his growing addiction to painkillers as well. When Hollyhock shows up and expresses concern that he's addicted to these drugs, he states that he isn't doing drugs. It's okay because it's prescribed medicine. I think it's really important to show these different forms of rationalization and present how casually these major issues can be dismissed in conversation even with those that genuinely care about you. And how even though Bojack might understand that he has an addictive personality, he still struggles with addiction and to fully admit that he has a core problem. And even when he does admit that he doesn't need the pills, he injures himself again to be able to keep taking them, while keeping up that perception that he is stable to those who would question him and possibly put a stop to his supply. More on this later. This cycle of behavior continues until he spirals far enough downward to harm someone else close to him in a major way, which is able to jostle him back to reality a little bit. And I also think it's extremely real to not actually realize that there is a devastating problem going on on until things reach a fever pitch, and it is so obvious that you can no longer lie to yourself. This is the catalyst for him actually admitting that he has a problem and going to rehab. Diane puts it best in the final scene when he starts to leave out of fear.
You want to go home?
Is that okay?
Look, you have two options. You can go back home and try to do things your way like you've been doing all your life, or you can see what these guys have to offer.
See, I don't want people thinking that I don't believe people are able to drink in moderation. I am just saying that Bojack has specifically tried to, quote, fix things on his own over and over again, even in the short period of time that we are with him, ignoring the fact that he fails every single time to make any significant progress, and that him admitting that he needs help fixing this issue is what allows him to actually effectively deal with it. I hope I'm not getting the wrong message across. But even after rehab, Bojack ends up sliding back into old behaviors. It happens when Hollyhock presumably distances herself from him. A lot of people blame Hollyhock for Bojack relapsing, but like I said above, part of recovery is learning to accept responsibility and the fact that you can't control everything. People might leave, even after you've resolved to do better and have made significant efforts in that endeavor. Does it mean that the effort wasn't worth it because they left? Or that it has no value? Hell, no! There were quite a few people who commented on my Hollyhock was justified video, saying that if she is valid for leaving, there's no point for Bojack to recover, which is, wow. First of all, way to put all of the pressure and responsibility for Bojack's recovery on one person. It's not only a little cruel, but it also outsources liability from yourself and helps you avoid holding yourself accountable in any way. You can't blame people for distancing themselves after learning the specifics of your old mistakes, and if you truly understand the ramifications of those actions and accepted the consequences, you wouldn't. Second of all, you shouldn't be doing this for other people in the first place. You should be wanting to be better for yourself, for your own health and success. If you are changing for someone, you are basically setting yourself up for failure. Because like I said, you can't control other people. But Bojack ultimately could not handle this loss of Hollyhock and turned back to what was more familiar as a coping mechanism. And this time, it went further than it ever has before, almost leading to his death. Thank God it did not, even though a lot of people wanted it to. Once again, they show Bojack moving through the realization of what he's done to himself, actually face direct legal consequences, and begin the recovery process over entirely again with renewed purpose. It's honestly inspiring in the finale to see him still on track, even if he is in prison. It's important to show that you can always try again, even if you fail to an extreme degree as Bojack does during season 6. And it doesn't pretend that Bojack will be okay forever either. It's very upfront about that in the finale. He's unsure if he'll make it outside of prison. Prison, as he says, is easy, but Todd gives him extremely reassuring advice in this area. If he relapses again, he can get sober again. It's all about turning yourself around. And that's not saying you shouldn't put in any effort to remain sober. It's just saying that if you eventually do relapse, it's not the end of the world. You can turn yourself around again. The next thing this show teaches us about mental health is that having or lacking mental health doesn't make someone a good or bad person, nor does it make them evil.
I'm a bad guy, and the world needs to know.
There's no such thing as bad guys or good guys. We're all just guys who do good stuff sometimes and bad stuff sometimes, and all we can do is try to do less bad stuff and more good stuff. But you're never going to be good because you're not bad. So you need to stop using that as an excuse.
Bojack thinks that he's an overtly terrible person, whether that be from the influence of his parents, his addiction, his past actions, what have you. But he sees himself as evil, or as a bad guy. But Diane is pretty adamant about the fact that the world doesn't really contain bad guys and good guys. It's not that simple or black and white. I mean, evidenced by the fact that the person giving him this advice was having sex with a married man semi-recently. Doesn't mean it's not good advice. It just means that everybody is a person and does awful things and good things sometimes. Pretending that it is that simple is what drives a lot of this negative behavior. By telling yourself over and over that you're fundamentally terrible, you're subconsciously saying to yourself that there's no possibility for positive change in your life. You're a terrible person at your core, and it is something that can't be fixed, when this is definitely not true. While yes, your actions speak about you as a person, they do not define everything that you are or everything that you could be. Just because you've done terrible things in your past doesn't mean you're incapable of great good in the future. Just as people who have only done good are capable of great evil. Don't limit yourself with this ideology and actually put in the effort. You might surprise yourself with the progress you make. Honestly, it's pretty much just an excuse. Change isn't easy, and it is extremely daunting. In the face of that challenge, a lot of people simply try to instinctively avoid it, and saying that you're only one thing is a hell of a lot easier. By the way, I'm not trying to criticize anyone. I am guilty of many of these things too. I have also felt the insurmountable wall of change and have provided excuses in the face of it to avoid doing it. It happens. It's something that we all do. But admitting it to yourself, while not easy, is one of the most important parts of the recovery process. She also tells Bojack that rehab isn't a cure-all. Working on your addiction, going on antidepressants, it can all help, but it's not necessarily what's going to fix you, especially your behavior. If you have a habit of treating people like shit, that is something you are also going to have to work to break and change. There are plenty of mentally healthy people who do awful things or are just flat out dicks. It's not what defines us as people. It can affect our behavior to the point where we can do more negative things or more good things, or how we process events and define ourselves, but it does not make us into an evil person. Nor does the person who emerges from rehab automatically become a good person just because they've admitted that they've done wrong. They're just a person who's trying to do better. We are all just people who are trying to do better, and all we can do is that. Just try. Another important aspect of mental health on this show is showing that you need to admit and face mistakes to be able to move on at all. There is no erasing the past, and you can never run from who you are or what you've done. The fact is, who you are is what you've done. This is one of the most important messages to take for someone who is trying to better themselves. Yes, your lack of mental health doesn't make you evil, but you can't avoid what you've done either. If you've made grievous mistakes or committed crimes and hurt the people closest to you, you need to be able to admit that to yourself and keep a realistic perspective of the damage you've done to your own life and the lives of those around you. Diane directly tells Bojack that no one is going to hold him accountable anyway. He keeps fictionalizing his situation as if he has no control over it, waiting for somebody else to come in and solve it all for him, like he's been praying Diane herself would do for so long, practically since he met her. In his realization with Dr. Champ, he asserts this as well, as he looks to the world to punish him, but because he's famous, he almost is never actually punished. And honestly, I don't think this is just a famous person thing. I think looking for other people to punish you is a bad way to go about recovery. You have to admit these things and accept the responsibility yourself. Part of that is accepting the consequences as well. No one's going to hold your hand through this either. I think Diane's approach to getting Bojack into rehab at the end of season 5 is probably the perfect tone to take. She's not overly sensitive or overtly cruel, but she's very matter of fact. This is what you've done. This is how you've avoided it, and this is how you can truly prove that you want to do better in the future. No one is going to force you to fix yourself, hold you down and tell you you have to do this. You have to want to, and to commit all on your own. And you wouldn't want people to do that either. If the only reason you're trying to get better is because someone else told you to, you're not going to put in as serious an effort as you need to. After all, you didn't even admit there was a problem yourself, so why would you need to do anything to fix it? People can help, absolutely, can support you and lift you up, but you cannot look to them to solve all your problems or to absolutely tell you exactly what you've done wrong and what you need to do to fix it. Just as moving on does not mean forgetting about what you've done. It's about resolving to do better in the face of the same circumstances. You're moving on from that type of behavior, not changing into a completely different human being. Part of this comes from that mindset that I mentioned earlier, where people see themselves as wholly good or bad. So when they actually do improve, they feel that they've completely changed their entire identity when those negative acts from their past are still a part of reality. None of this absolves you of the consequences just because you're a different person. Bojack shows this in Sunk Cost and all that, where he feels that because he has changed and put in a great amount of effort to improve himself, he shouldn't be held accountable or face consequences for things that he had done before he started to improve.
No, they can't get me on old shit. I'm a different person now.
He's a different person now, and he didn't do those things. But Todd is really the one who questions this idea, saying that, first of all, he really isn't a different person, especially with how he's reacting during this conversation. Even if he has changed, though, he's simply being reported for things that he has actually done. Like Todd says, the fact of the matter is, that story that he tells about New Mexico is super sketchy. You did those things. Like I said before, if you truly understand and grasp the impact of what you've done, then you know that you can't really ever escape the consequences. And you can't blame people for bringing it to light, especially considering that people you hurt are simply trying to tell their story. The real difference between the first and second interview is that while, yes, Biscuits does go softer on him the first time, he wasn't willing to see the value in her points the second time and instead took to mainly defending himself. She painted a pretty obvious pattern and provided strict examples for why she came to this conclusion about him having power over women and repeatedly abusing it, which she was absolutely correct about. But he states that he barely has power over himself, denying the point entirely instead of actually considering the truth of it and trying to learn from it. I did take solace, however, along with Diane, when they show a small part of the interview we didn't see at the end of this episode, Xerox of a Xerox, where he admits that the person who committed those acts is the same man as he is now.
I keep hearing you say, that's not me, I've changed. But how can we believe you've stopped this pattern of behavior if you won't acknowledge this pattern exists?
I don't even know what pattern you're talking about.
I'll try one more time. Over these last 2 nights, you've drawn us an outline of a person who doesn't think about others, a person who puts his own needs first. And over, other people get hurt. This person I'm describing, is it a different person? Or is it you?
Oh.
Yeah, it's me.
That is how I knew that Bojack was actually sincere in his efforts this season and recognized, albeit not fully yet, the pain he caused the people around him. And I really appreciate Bojack not exactly going back and blaming Biscuits or Penny, especially Penny, for his cancellation in Hollywood's mainstream media. Yes, in the moment he is very upset with Biscuits, but later on, he never goes back to attack her. He understands that his life is falling apart because of the results of his own actions, not theirs. Another important aspect is that your mental health is not a part of your personality or who you are, and it definitely does not define you as a person. It is an illness like any other. This is most obviously exemplified in Good Damage in season 6, where Diane feels the reason she struggles to access her damage is because of the medication that has been helping ease her depression. We also see in Face of Depression that she considers this to be the quote real Diane when she confesses to Bojack that she believes Guy will eventually tire of her and leave her.
We're probably gonna break up soon anyway. There's only so long before he gets tired of the real me.
The real you being...
Ta-da!
You know, someone got really mad at me recently.
Mad at you?
I know, shocking. And he said, Bojack, you ruin everything. That's what you are.
Oof.
And it actually took him saying it out loud for me to realize how stupid that is, even though I believed it for so long. I bought into this idea that I was the thing that couldn't be changed.
Like Bojack for most of the series, she believes that this constant awful feeling in the pit of her stomach, this nagging voice telling her she's terrible in the back of her head, is something that is just classic Diane, something she will never grow out of, and something that is just a part of her personality and who she is as a person. She attributes her being able to access her own damage to her actually needing to be depressed, when in reality, she just doesn't want to write this tragic book of essays. She's forcing herself to because she thinks she needs to. She has this false perception of herself as this extremely damaged person that needs to continually be damaged to make everything she's gone through mean something. Even if you are mentally improving, you don't need to go exactly back to the negative place you were in to be able to understand what you were feeling. There are plenty of people who are in a much better place than a lot of the characters in these shows are, but still identify with the issues. And this is evidenced by the fact that when she does actually go off of her meds and try to write, she's still not able to get anything done at all. She can't access the damage here either. She just invites all that self-hate that was previously there. And instead, when she does take her prescribed medication, she's able to write something genuinely fun and colorful, as well as being able to relate it to her own experiences as a child to uplift those who are going through the same hardships that she went through. And she is able to access that damage without internalizing any of the hatred that was inflicted on her through the negative experiences in her childhood. And we see through Guy's son, Sonny, that this does actually have that effect as well, even on those she didn't intend to connect with, because she not only decided to share her experiences, but she did so in a way that fueled her creativity and provided her some happiness, rather than the existential dread that her book of essays did. There's a reason why Ivy Tran Food Court Detective is so successful as a literary work, despite the fact that Diane sees it as initially ludicrous. It's because she enjoys writing it. She actually has fun. She doesn't put pressure on herself to feel miserable just so she can create this piece that she believes is required of her. And Bojack relates to this. He saw himself as someone who couldn't be changed, someone who just was terrible and would always hurt people around him. But that idea itself is stupid. And I'm not being flip here. He literally says that it is stupid, and I agree. It is the ultimate excuse that people tell themselves so that they don't have to do any sort of work whatsoever or admit anything they've done. What can they do? Like I touched on before, some people believe that this is their nature and they can't change it. Sometimes due to failed attempts in the past, or simply because of the severity of their mistakes. And I have felt this. Even as I'm talking about all of these things, I still struggle to admit my own shortcomings. It's something we all struggle to do. But because the show touches on that so realistically and in depth, we are able to more easily recognize those patterns in ourselves and get the help we need ahead of time. Because this idea is bullshit. You can always change for the better, especially if you recognize what you're actually doing wrong. That is, as everyone says, the first step, and it's not a lie. You know, I see a lot of comments on my videos of people comparing themselves to Bojack, telling everyone how hopeless they feel, how they think they can never change, but by the end of the series, we saw Bojack put actual effort into changing and began to repair some of his relationships. It is possible. That is the message of this show. While it is never linear, while it is never easy, it is always possible. Please don't ever think that you are stuck as the person you are now. If you don't like something about yourself, you can work to change it. And it starts by getting some help, therapy, a friend you can trust, someone you can talk to about your emotions, who can provide an alternate perspective, and at least recenter you and your perception of yourself so you don't spiral off and think of yourself as an evil person who can't ever be changed. As Bojack says,
The main thing I think about is how stupid I am that I didn't do this sooner. I wasted so many years being miserable because I assumed that was the only way to be. And I don't want to do that anymore.
it keeps you in this state of almost self-harm where you internalize this as a part of you, or sometimes, in Bojack's case, you feel that you deserve to feel terrible. Diane goes through this as well when she takes herself off of her medication. It's part of that negative self-talk. Bojack doesn't realize how ridiculous it all sounds until he hears it from someone else outside of his own brain, which, by the way, is an extremely realistic way to portray how these realizations occur. There's so much self-hate in our own brains that just speeds by on a daily basis, making it seem like it's completely normal. But then, if somebody said that to you out loud, it would seem like the most out-of-pocket, rude thing you could possibly think of. It's fascinating to me. And I, of course, had this feeling as well. I thought for a long time that my mental illness was just a part of my personality. Oh yeah, I love checking the locks on doors exactly 10 times before I go to sleep at night because I'm just a meticulous person. No, okay, I didn't want to admit that I actually had OCD and needed to go to a therapist, talk about my issues, and eventually go on medication, which I am on now and has been helping me for years. It's really important to address these things, and that's why I'm, one, making this video, and two, so enamored by Bojack Bojack Horseman because it is such a beautifully accurate depiction about what it is like inside your own head when you are going through these issues and how to both not deal with and effectively deal with these issues yourself. One other thing that Bojack really succeeds at in the area of mental health is never, ever glamorizing it or portraying it as something that is desirable to have, which many shows that depict mental illness often make the mistake of doing. It's why I think episodes like Escape from LA are wholly crucial to this show's message, because they depict that very ugly side of mental illness, how it can drive you to such lows where you do the most reprehensible things, the most creepy and sketchy things, all for the sake of easing your own pain in the worst way possible. And besides these wrong and obviously disgusting things that Bojack may do, there's also the fact that whenever he goes on a bender, it's always shown as very destructive and never a fun activity. I know it may seem simple, but it is definitely important to depict. People are hurt, even killed, during these acts, and they go a long way to show just how vehemently awful these are for not only your life, but the lives of those around you. And speaking how it can affect those around you, it also shows how taking care of other people who may be struggling with their mental health is not your responsibility.
Diana, you are not responsible for the dysfunction of others. I actually explore this in my book. Are you responsible for the dysfunction of others? Spoiler alert, you're not.
Especially with Diane in season 6. Before she leaves, she specifically feels that she needs to make sure that Bojack will be okay without her, and that her leaving will not negatively impact his recovery. And then, after she does leave, Bojack does slide back in Angela, eventually almost killing himself. And this really shakes Diane's confidence in her new life with Guy, which is actually beneficial to her. I am so glad that she was able to actually commit to Guy and choose happiness for herself even after this major setback with Bojack. She's even able to completely leave him behind in an effort to protect her own mental health, which I think is a really powerful message for Diane, who also went through a major struggle with her own sense of self and her mental health issues throughout this series. And her choosing to distance herself from Bojack and to be able to let him go and trust that he will be able to take care of himself is one of the most beautiful things that this show did in its ending. We can also see this realization exhibited in Princess Carolyn, who over the series takes care of a lot of Bojack's mistakes and failings and feels generally responsible for his mental health and well-being, just because she generally loves and cares for him and wants to see him succeed, even if they aren't romantically involved anymore. But she eventually realizes that that might not be her responsibility, and she may be putting too much faith and too much time into someone who needs to realize their failings for themselves, and that covering up for them is not going to help anything.
This is just a ratings win she can use as leverage for her next big paycheck.
Maybe.
She was all over the place. I think people are going to see that she was just out to get me. I mean, people are going to see that, right?
Well, I guess we'll find out tonight.
Okay, maybe she had some good points, but she completely undermined herself with, like, I mean, we dated for like 7 years. Do you think that I took advantage of you?
I'm here, aren't I?
And she kept bringing it back to women. These women I hurt, because that's what's hip now, right? Hurting women. But I have also hurt a lot of men.
I told you to do just the one interview and go back to Connecticut.
I think depicting how detrimental it can be for yourself when you still commit time to trying to fix somebody else when they prove time and time again that it's not going to work or help them in any way is also super important for people who might be in that situation in real life. And the last thing that the show teaches us is that the signs of mental health problems are not always visible on the surface. We can see this most evidently with Mr. Peanut Butter, as he presents himself as a happy-go-lucky figure at all times to garner attention and love, even when he's suffering on the inside, whether that be from low self-esteem or actual depression. Joey Pogo is the first one to directly address this concept, saying that those who smile on the outside can actually sometimes be the most depressed. And while his stint in rehab was an absolute joke, he he does touch on an extremely important concept here. The signs of depression aren't always obvious or manifest in the common ways that many think. That is, Bojack's brand of negative attitude and self-hatred. A lot of times, people who struggle with their mental health cover it up with a broad smile or a fun-loving demeanor. And when Mr. Peanut Butter is doubting himself and feeling particularly low, he avoids it by trying to stay around other people as often as he can, throwing parties, scheduling events, and just distracting himself in every way possible. And this has a really negative effect on his emotional state and overall mental health, as we can see that when he tries to ignore something, it can come out and explode in other ways, like in Old Acquaintance, when he denies that his brother is having a problem the whole episode, but when Diane pushes, he snaps at her.
Labs prefer to keep things playful. You know what they say about dogs. Talking to each other is rough.
I'm serious, Mr. Peanut Butter.
And I'm serious that you should drop it. If something was really wrong, he would tell me about it.
Would he? I know he's your brother, but I think he's hiding something from you.
Why do you think you know my brother better than I do?
Whoa.
Just because you have a shitty relationship with your family doesn't mean every other family has to have drama too.
Oh,
I wanted to come up here and have a nice time. This place is an escape for me.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I should not have shouted at you.
It's because he's not dealing with those emotions and is instead just repressing them. He doesn't allow himself to feel this depression or feel this negativity. He thinks it is always incorrect when you're never supposed to feel positive all the time. Or how about Princess Carolyn? As a high-power career woman, she always gives off the aura that she is completely in control of her entire life, even when everything around her is falling apart and she doesn't even believe in herself. Due to her childhood, Princess Carolyn requires control over every aspect of her life. So to retain that aura that she can do it all, she papers over her own emotions and barrels forward, trying to achieve so much in her work life that it renders her personal issues irrelevant. Because look at all this success, how could I be doing poorly? We see this evidenced when she is first taking care of Ruthie, and she makes extensive efforts to prove that she can not only be the best mother of all time, but also be the head of a company and not sacrifice any part of her work life. All the while, she sinks lower and lower and gets more and more desperate because she's not actually taking care of her personal issues. It just goes to show that there aren't really exceptions to mental illness or mental health problems. Everyone can struggle now and then, no matter how together they actually appear on the surface, or whether or not they have a diagnosable disorder. Not just because of that, mental health is not just about recovering from mental illness. But we can also see this through the perspective of those closest to Bojack. It's interesting to see how he's able to play off his addictions and issues to not alarm anyone close to him, especially in season 5. Gina has to actively look in some insanely random and weird hiding places to find all of the pills that Bojack has stashed away. And although she does eventually catch on to his odd behavior, he's able to sink rather deep and play it off to those around him as if it isn't a problem for an alarmingly long amount of time, using lies like he's bringing the character home with him, or that he's still feeling the effects of his injuries, or just straight up changing the subject when any concern is brought up. He's even able to convince Hollyhock, someone who has grown extremely close to him in the past year, that he has a handle on his issues by semi-admitting his problems and then injuring himself to be able to continue taking the pills, not fully admitting that he has an actual problem that needs to be dealt with, instead prolonging the issue and pushing off that extremely tough realization for later. Both of these instances show how gifted addicts can be in the art of deception, or people who are going through mental health issues, and how easy it can be to play off your illnesses as if they aren't really a problem. People close to you need to take an active role and get very involved to be able to see what's truly going on. And while it isn't their responsibility to fix the person, I think it is important to depict how normal people can seem even while they're going through an extremely rough period, so that perhaps more around those who struggle can provide the help or voice of reason they might need after recognizing the more subtle signs of these issues. I also find it interesting that Diane is often the one able to give other characters in this show amazing advice, despite the fact that she has not been fully fleshed out herself yet and is extremely flawed as well. It shows that everyone has work to do on themselves. It's not something that is exclusive to those with severe alcoholism. There are those who struggle day to day with depression who don't depend on substances, but still live with this extremely negative mindset and poor image of their own selves every single day. Someone can understand every single piece of advice I've given in this video and still struggle with their mental health and admit it to themselves, and that is me included. Like I said, it is not a linear process, and it doesn't mean you are inherently broken if you struggle either. Mental health and taking care of your emotional state is a part of life. It has its ups and downs, its illnesses and healthy periods, like any other aspect of your life that you need to take care of. And I thank Bojack Horseman for helping me understand that so viscerally and showing so many different ways mental illness or mental health problems can manifest in different types of people. It's really crucial to show people all these symptoms so that not only can people recognize the signs in others, but also in themselves and admit that they actually have an issue. And I think this show really did get a lot of people to realize what they have been doing to themselves, including me, honestly. I mean, I will owe this show for the rest of my life, probably. But if you enjoyed this video, consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/PosiTVty to get extra content, and you get these videos early and the unedited essays, so you get to hear all the mistakes I've made, plus some little tidbits, fun little facts about my recording process for the patrons if you're interested in that sort of thing. But the support on YouTube means a lot as well. Thank you for liking, subscribing, commenting. All of it means a ton to us, and we love discussing all of these shows with you guys. So keep on talking. And we will see you guys for the next one. Don't be afraid to let us know what you think it should be. I've been doing a lot of Bojack videos. I have many more ideas, but I'm sure you guys do too. So hit me up with those in the comments below, and I'll probably do it.